The tension in the cafe was palpable as Frank's eyes darted between Robert, the bikers, and the other patrons, searching for an ally or an escape route. However, the biker leader remained focused, his voice measured yet firm. "We couldn't help but overhear your conversation," he said, eyes locked on Frank. "And we have a few things to say about it." Frank's expression shifted from anger to fear as he tried to assert his authority. "This is my establishment," he sputtered, his voice rising. "I have the right to serve who I want." The biker leader nodded slowly, conveying both understanding and disagreement. "You're right. This is your establishment," he conceded. "But rights come with responsibilities, and one of those is to treat all people with respect and dignity." As he spoke, the biker reached into his leather jacket, causing Frank to flinch, likely expecting the worst. But what he pulled out was a worn leather wallet from which he extracted a military ID, similar to the one Robert had shown earlier. "You see," the biker continued, his voice deepening with emotion, "many of us here are veterans too. We've served alongside men and women of all races, creeds, and backgrounds. We've bled together, fought together, mourned together." A murmur swept through the cafe as the implications sank in. Robert felt a surge of emotion, surprise, gratitude, and a renewed sense of camaraderie he hadn't felt in years. The biker leader wasn't finished. He gestured to his companions, and one by one they stepped forward, some displaying military IDs, others rolling up sleeves to reveal military tattoos. Each stood tall, faces a mix of pride in their service and anger at the injustice they were witnessing. One biker, a black man with graying temples, stepped beside the leader, eyes blazing with controlled anger. "We fought alongside men of all colors," he stated firmly, his voice clear in the now silent cafe. "Your prejudice has no place here. It has no place anywhere." Realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched, Frank grew increasingly defensive, his face contorted with a mix of fear and hatred. He looked around for support from the other patrons but found only averted gazes and disapproving looks. "This is my cafe," Frank shouted, his voice reaching a near hysterical pitch. "I have the right to serve who I want." Spittle flew from his mouth in agitation, fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The biker leader remained calm amid Frank's outburst. "And we have the right to take our business elsewhere," he replied evenly. "But first, you owe this man an apology." He gestured toward Robert, who watched the scene unfold with amazement and gratitude. However, Frank was beyond reason. The confrontation pushed him past his breaking point, and his words came out in a rush of anger and fear. "Get out!" he yelled, face red with rage. "All of you! This is my place, and I decide who stays." The biker leader, introducing himself as Mike, fixed Frank with a steady gaze. "You'll bitterly regret this," he said, his voice low yet filled with the weight of a promise. There was no heat in his words, just the certainty of consequences to come. Robert, silent throughout the exchange, felt a whirlwind of emotions. He was touched by the unexpected support and amazed at the turn of events, but concerned about the escalating situation. As much as he appreciated the bikers standing up for him, he didn't want the situation to devolve into something worse. Mike, sensing Robert's unease, turned to him with a reassuring nod. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "We have our own ways of settling things." The other bikers nodded in agreement, a sense of purpose evident in their expressions. With that, Mike gestured to his group, and they began to file out of the cafe. As they passed Robert, Each one nodded respectfully or offered a word of support, and Robert felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by this unexpected show of solidarity. As the last biker left, the cafe erupted into a buzz of conversation. Some patrons were leaving, clearly comfortable with what had transpired, while others engaged in heated discussions, the morning's events stirring strong feelings. Frank, still flushed with anger, retreated to the kitchen without another word. Sarah, the young waitress, approached Robert hesitantly. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your breakfast is on the house if you still want it." Robert looked at her kind face and then at the chaotic scene in the cafe. Despite his hunger, he felt no appetite. "Thank you, but I think I'll be going," he replied gently. "It's been quite a morning." Stepping out of the cafe and into the bright sunlight, Robert found himself surrounded by the group of bikers. The contrast between the tense atmosphere inside and the open air outside was stark, and he felt he could breathe freely for the first time since entering the cozy corner. Mike approached, concern etched on his weathered face. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice gruff yet kind. Robert nodded, still processing the events. "I'm fine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want to thank you all. You didn't have to do that." The bikers gathered around him, forming a protective circle. Their leather jackets gleamed in the sunlight, each patch and pin telling stories of their own journeys and battles. For a moment, Robert felt a sense of camaraderie with these men, who he might have been wary of just an hour ago. Mike placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, both comforting and respectful. "We always stand up for our own," he said firmly. "No veteran should ever be treated the way you were in there. It goes against everything we fought for." A lump formed in Robert's throat. After years of feeling alone in his battles, he found himself surrounded by a group willing to stand beside him. "I appreciate that more than you know," he said, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I have to ask, what did you mean when you told Frank he'd regret this? I don't want any violence. I've seen enough of that in my lifetime." Mike's expression softened with understanding. "Don't worry," he reassured Robert. "We have our own ways of settling things. No violence, I promise you that. We're long past those days." The other bikers nodded, a sense of purpose evident in their expressions. Robert looked from face to face, recognizing the determination and shared sense of injustice in their eyes. These men had likely faced their own battles with prejudice and misunderstanding. They understood the sting of being judged based solely on appearances. "What do you have in mind?" Robert asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Mike smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Let's just say we know how to make our presence felt without raising a fist. Frank's about to learn that his actions have consequences, and those consequences can hit him where it really hurts. His business." A mix of emotions washed over Robert. He was grateful for the support, but also concerned about what was to come. Robert felt a mix of gratitude and concern as he saw the bikers' willingness to support him. "I appreciate what you're doing," he said carefully, "but I don't want to make things worse. This town has its problems, but it's still my home." Mike nodded, understanding. "We're not here to cause trouble, Robert. We're here to make things right. Sometimes that means shaking things up a bit, but trust me, we know what we're doing." As they spoke, Robert marveled at the unexpected turn his morning had taken. He had walked into the cafe feeling isolated, but now he was surrounded by men ready to defend his dignity. It was a powerful reminder that support could come from the most unlikely places. "Thank you," Robert said again, sincerity filling his voice. "It means more than you know." The bikers responded with nods and supportive words, sharing a sense of solidarity born from battles fought both overseas and at home. As the group began to disperse, Mike turned to Robert one last time. "We'll be around," he said. "If you need anything, just let us know. And don't worry about Frank or the cafe. We'll ensure justice is served in our own way." With that, the bikers mounted their motorcycles, their engines roaring to life in a symphony of power and freedom. Robert watched as they rode off, their leather jackets and chrome gleaming in the morning sun. As the sound of their engines faded into the distance, he found himself standing alone on the sidewalk, the events of the morning still swirling in his mind. He began his walk home, his steps slow and contemplative. The peaceful Sunday morning he had anticipated had turned into something entirely unexpected. Yet, as he walked, Robert felt a glimmer of hope. Hope he hadn't felt in years. Perhaps change was possible, even in a small town like Ashwood. Perhaps there were more allies out there than he had realized. When he reached his house, he paused on the porch, looking back toward the cafe, wondering what the coming days would bring. With a deep breath, he entered his home, ready to reflect on the morning's events and prepare for whatever lay ahead. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the sun rising over Ashwood as if nothing had changed. But for Robert, everything felt different. The previous day's events had shaken him, bringing both pain and an unexpected sense of hope. He rose early, as was his habit, and as he went through his morning routine, his mind drifted back to the confrontation at the cozy corner. He recalled Frank's hateful words, but also the surprising support from Mike and his group of bikers. It was a stark reminder that cruelty and kindness could emerge from unexpected sources. After a simple breakfast at home, Robert decided to take a walk into town. He told himself it was just to pick up a newspaper from the kiosk near the cafe, but deep down, he was curious to see if anything had changed overnight. As he approached the town center, everything seemed normal at first. The usual morning bustle was in full swing with people hurrying to work or running errands. But as Robert neared the cozy corner, he noticed something unusual. A crowd had gathered in front of the cafe, much larger than the typical morning rush. Getting closer, Robert's eyes widened in surprise. Parked in front of the cafe was a line of motorcycles, their chrome glistening in the morning sun. Standing in front of them, forming a human barrier at the cafe's entrance, were dozens of bikers. Robert counted quickly. There were over 50 of them, far more than had been present the day before. The bikers stood silently, their presence both imposing and peaceful. Many wore jackets adorned with military insignia, a testament to their service and solidarity. The scene was surreal. The quiet, small-town street had transformed into a stage for a powerful statement. Passers-by stopped to stare, some taking photos, others whispering among themselves. The contrast between the peaceful morning and the imposing sight of the bikers was striking. As Robert took in the scene, he felt a complex mix of emotions. There was a sense of vindication in witnessing such a strong response to the injustice he had faced, but also concern about the impact this would have on the town and worry about potential backlash. While he stood there trying to process everything, he noticed Mike emerging from the group of bikers. Spotting Robert, Mike approached with a warm smile. "Good morning, Robert," he greeted, his voice carrying satisfaction. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Robert nodded, still somewhat at a loss for words. I didn't expect this," he finally managed to say. When you said you had your own ways, I never imagined." Mike chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "We bikers know a thing or two about making a statement, and we take care of our own. What happened to you yesterday? That's not just your fight, it's ours too." As they spoke, Robert noticed movement at the cafe's entrance. Frank emerged, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "What is this?" he sputtered, looking around wildly. "You can't do this. I'll call the police." Mike turned to Frank, his demeanor calm but resolute. "Go ahead," he said evenly. "We're not breaking any laws. We're just a group of veterans visiting a local cafe." Frank's face reddened further, if that was possible. He stormed back into the cafe, slamming the door behind him. Through the window, Robert saw him frantically dialing on his phone. "He's calling the police," Robert observed, a note of worry in his voice. Mike nodded, seemingly unfazed. "Let him. We're not doing anything illegal. We're just making a point." Sure enough, within minutes, the sound of police sirens filled the air. 2 patrol cars pulled up and officers emerged, looking both confused and cautious at the scene before them. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with graying hair at his temples, approached Mike. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone professional but wary. Mike stepped forward, respectful yet firm. "Good morning, officer. We're just a group of veterans who heard about an incident of discrimination at this establishment yesterday. We're here to peacefully protest and show our support for our fellow veteran." He gestured toward Robert. The officer's eyes widened slightly as he recognized Robert. "Mr. Thompson," he said, nodding in greeting. "Is this true? Were you discriminated against here?" Feeling the weight of the moment, Robert stepped forward, knowing his words could significantly impact what happened next. "Yes, officer," he said clearly. "Yesterday, I was refused service and told to leave solely because of the color of my skin." A hush fell over the crowd as Robert's words resonated, the weight of injustice hanging heavily in the air. Those who had been merely passing by stopped to listen. Robert could see a mix of reactions on the faces around him: shock, anger, shame, and, in some cases, uncomfortable recognition. The officer nodded gravely, then turned back to Mike. "So, this demonstration is your response?" "Yes, sir," Mike confirmed. "We're here peacefully. We're not blocking the sidewalk or preventing anyone from entering. We're simply making our presence known." The officer considered this for a moment before nodding. "All right. As long as you remain peaceful and don't obstruct business or pedestrian traffic, you're within your rights to be here." As the officer turned to leave, Frank burst out of the cafe again, disbelief etched on his face. "You're just going to let them stay?" he demanded. "They're ruining my business." The officer fixed Frank with a stern look. "Sir, they have the right to peaceful protest. If what Mr. Thompson says is true, you might want to consider the real reason your business is suffering." With that, he returned to his patrol car, leaving Frank sputtering on the sidewalk. As the morning wore on, more people gathered. Some were merely curious onlookers, while others began to join the protest. Robert saw several of his neighbors arrive, expressing their support and outrage at how he had been treated. Local news vans began to arrive, reporters eager to cover the unfolding story. Robert watched as Mike calmly explained the situation to them, his words measured yet powerful as he recounted the previous day's events and emphasized the need for change. As Robert stood there, he felt a profound sense of transformation in the air. What had started as a painful incident of discrimination had evolved into something much larger, a moment for the community to reckon with its hidden prejudices and perhaps begin the healing process. He marveled at how quickly things had escalated. Just yesterday, he had entered the cozy corner hoping for a quiet breakfast, and now he found himself at the center of a movement poised to shake the very foundations of his small town. The days that followed the protest were a whirlwind of activity in Ashwood. The small town, usually quiet and set in its ways, found itself thrust into the spotlight. News vans became a common sight on Main Street, with reporters eager to cover the unfolding story of discrimination and community response. For Frank, the owner of the cozy corner, the consequences of his actions were swift and severe. The image of dozens of bikers peacefully protesting outside his cafe made national news, bringing unwanted attention to his discriminatory practices. Following the scandal, Frank's business crumbled under the weight of public outrage and the ongoing boycott. The once bustling cafe now stood mostly empty, a stark contrast to its formerly lively atmosphere. Through the large front windows, passers-by could see Frank inside, looking dejected and defeated. The cheerful clinking of coffee cups and the aroma of freshly baked goods had given way to an eerie silence, accompanied by the stale smell of a neglected space. James, who often walked past the cafe during his daily strolls, felt a mix of emotions. There was a sense of justice being served, but also a sadness at witnessing a once thriving local business reduced to this. He reminded himself that this was the consequence of Frank's own actions, not something he had sought or desired. As the boycott entered its third week, a new development emerged. Mike and his biker group, seeing an opportunity to effect real change in the community, approached Frank with an offer to buy the cafe. James was present when Mike presented the offer, having been invited by the biker leader to witness this pivotal moment. They stood in the nearly empty cafe, the silence broken only by the ticking of a wall clock and the occasional car passing outside. Mike's expression was serious as he faced Frank across one of the cafe's tables. "It's time for a change," he said firmly, sliding a document across to Frank. "We're offering to buy the cozy corner from you at fair market value, despite the current situation." Frank's hand trembled as he reached for the paper, his eyes darting between Mike and James. The once confident cafe owner now seemed like a shadow of his former self. Weeks of public scrutiny and financial stress had taken their toll, etching deep lines into his face and adding a noticeable tremor to his movements. "Why?" Frank asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you want this place after everything that's happened?" Mike leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Because we believe in second chances, but we also believe in consequences. This town needs a place where everyone is truly welcome. We aim to make that happen." James watched as Frank studied the offer, a range of emotions flickering across his face: relief, shame, resignation. After what felt like an eternity, Frank picked up a pen and, with a shaking hand, signed the document. As the pen scratched across the paper, James felt as if he was witnessing more than just a business transaction. It was the end of one era and the beginning of another. The symbolism was clear. A cafe that had once been a site of discrimination was now being transformed into a beacon of inclusivity. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with news of the change in ownership. Mike and his team worked tirelessly to renovate the space, transforming it both physically and symbolically. The old sign for the cozy corner came down, replaced by a new one reading Unity Café, a nod to the biker and veteran communities. The grand reopening of the cafe was a community event. People from all walks of life in Ashwood turned out to see the transformed space. The new Unity Café was warm and inviting, with walls adorned with photos celebrating diversity in the military, the biker community, and the town itself. James was honored to be the first customer. As he entered the cafe, he was struck by the changes. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, filled with the chatter of a diverse group of patrons. He saw young families, elderly couples, and yes, a group of bikers, all sharing the space comfortably. Mike greeted James with a warm handshake, leading him to a seat at the counter, the very spot where he had faced discrimination weeks before. "What do you think?" Mike asked, gesturing around the bustling cafe. As James took a moment to absorb the atmosphere around him, he noticed Emily, the young waitress from before, now serving with a smile on her face, free from the tension of the past. New faces behind the counter reflected the community's diversity, a stark contrast to what had been. "This is more than I ever could have imagined," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've transformed something painful into something beautiful." Mike nodded, satisfaction evident on his face. "That's what we do, James. We take the ugly things in life and rebuild them, making them better. It's what we did in the service, and it's what we're doing here." As the day progressed, the cafe buzzed with activity. The grand reopening attracted people from all walks of life in Ashwood, creating a vibrant atmosphere worlds away from the tension of just a few weeks ago. James observed the diverse crowd, a mix of families, elderly couples, groups of friends, and several bikers, all comfortably sharing the space, their laughter and chatter filling the air. His attention was drawn to a young boy, no more than 7 or 8, who approached a table where an elderly couple was seated. The boy's parents watched nervously from a distance, but their anxiety turned to joy as they witnessed what happened next. With all the innocence of youth, the boy struck up a conversation with the couple. James couldn't hear their words, but the smiles blooming on their faces spoke volumes. It was a small moment, but represented something much larger, breaking down barriers and fostering understanding across generations and races. Mike, who had been chatting with other patrons, returned to his seat beside James, following his gaze to the heartwarming scene. "Now that," he said softly, "is what it's all about." James nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. The simple interaction embodied everything they had been fighting for. Just then, Emily approached with a fresh pot of coffee, and James noticed a small pin on her apron that read, "Equality serves everyone." It was a small detail, but spoke volumes about the changes taking place. "Refill, Mr. Thompson?" she asked with a warm smile. James nodded, holding out his mug. "Thank you, Emily, and please, call me James." Her smile widened. "You got it, James," she replied before moving on to the next customer. Mike raised his mug, gesturing for James to do the same. "What do you say we make a toast?" Curious, James raised his own mug. "What are we toasting to?" Mike's eyes swept across the cafe before settling back on James. To unexpected friendships, standing up for what's right, to second chances and new beginnings, and to a future where everyone feels welcome. James added softly but firmly, and to unity in our community. Their mugs clinked together, the sound ringing out clearly amid the cafe's chatter. It was a small moment, just 2 men sharing coffee and conversation, but it represented something much larger: the power of community, the strength found in unity, and the change that can happen when people come together to stand against injustice. As James looked around the bustling cafe once more, he felt a profound sense of hope. The Unity Cafe had become more than just a place for coffee and breakfast. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, a symbol of the positive change that can emerge from even the darkest moments. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of solidarity and community transformation, the narrator said. If this story of standing up against injustice touched your heart as much as it did ours, I've handpicked another inspiring tale I know you'll love. Please don't miss it. Click here to watch it next.